50th Anniversary of the First Moon Landing by Learn with News. Level 3. On July 20th, 1969, people landed on the moon for the first time. Apollo 11 was the result of years of hard work, pushing the boundaries of science and technology. It has long been considered one of the greatest achievements in the history of mankind. Now, 50 years later, people around the world have been looking back and celebrating the accomplishments of the scientists, engineers, and astronauts who worked for NASA at that time. The landing was a result of the space race between the USA and the Soviet Union. At the end of World War II, the Soviet Union and the USA both attempted to recruit German rocket scientists. German rocketry was far more advanced than any other country at the time, and both countries wanted to get ahead due to the military applications of rockets. One of the applications for rockets was the potential ability to go into space. Space was often seen as being the next strategic step for a country to be dominant. It was predicted that control of space would be as important as control of the oceans in the 18th century or control of the air in World War II. NASA was founded in 1958 in order to lead the United States space efforts. Project Mercury was the first program that NASA created, the goal being to have an astronaut orbit the Earth. This was considered to be one of the key goals of the space race. However, the Soviet Union achieved many of the first milestones in the space race, often just weeks or months before NASA. The Soviet Union launched the first man, Yuri Gagarin, into space on April 12, 1961. The first American in space was Al Shepard, just 3 weeks later on May 5, 1961. The Soviet Union beating the U.S. to put the first man in space troubled President Kennedy, who thought Soviet dominance in space would embarrass the U.S. Kennedy asked Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson to look into how the U.S. could win the space race. It was soon decided that the U.S. had superior rocket technology to land on the moon first. In September 1962, Kennedy delivered his famous "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech, announcing the plans for the U.S. to land a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. NASA was already working on Project Gemini, the follow-up to Project Mercury, at this time, and used the program to test many of the things they would need in order to go to the moon. Apollo, although started alongside Gemini in 1961, could not truly begin until all of the goals from Gemini had been met. In 1967, the first Apollo mission was ready to take place. Its goal was to test the new Apollo Command and Service Module, the part of the rocket which the astronauts flew to the moon and back in. Sadly, the 3 Apollo 1 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were all killed during a routine ground test of the command module when it set on fire and they were trapped inside. The Apollo 1 fire almost ended the space program, but government support was still behind NASA, and after months of investigations, the program continued. 2 years later, on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched to the moon with astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. After 3 days of travel through space, Armstrong and Aldrin took the lunar module down to land on the moon. Michael Collins was the command module pilot and orbited the moon, waiting to rendezvous with Armstrong and Aldrin when it was time to return to Earth. The last manned voyage to the moon took place in December 1972. No human has been to the moon since this time. Recently, interest about the moon has renewed, involving talks about setting up a moon base or traveling to the moon again. Proponents of the idea believe it would be a good first step towards sending a manned mission to Mars. NASA currently has plans to go to the moon in 2024. However, it is uncertain whether the plans will go ahead.